So, John, here we are this week. We're moving very fast. At the beginning of the week, the staff attorneys for the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee essentially testified to the House Judiciary Committee. Within the next day, it was announced that there would be 2 articles of impeachment that were to be voted on by the Judiciary Committee. And next week, we're going to see the full vote in front of the House. And then presumably they send it to the Senate. You know, Nancy Pelosi was saying months ago that this was the pace of things. I thought that's impossible, but they've done it. Give me your take on how the impeachment has gone from the perspective of both the voters and the benefit, and whether there is an opportunity cost to it or whether it's being mishandled in some fashion.
You put a lot of things on the table, all of them important. First and foremost, it's vital that Donald Trump be impeached. I favor impeachment. I think it's important as a historian of this accountability tool. I'm glad it's being used. The problem with impeachment, the great challenge, is that it's a very ill-defined power. It is immense. It is very real. Even if a president is not removed, the fact that a president is impeached will go on his, or maybe someday in the future, her permanent record. This is real. Today, in these recent days, as impeachment has come down, there has been, much recollection of the fact that very few presidents have been impeached in history. So, big deal here. But because it is an ill-defined power, we're going to have debates about how best to do it. In my opinion, I would have liked to have seen a couple more articles of impeachment. They've come forward with an abuse of power article, which I think was absolutely necessary. That relates to the Ukraine pressuring of a president of another country to launch an investigation that would involve potentially influence a U.S. election. Absolutely necessary article of impeachment. They've also done an article on the efforts to obstruct Congress. And to my mind, that's the most important article that you can put forward, because the fact of the matter is, if a president can obstruct a congressional investigation into his wrongdoing, then we have essentially eliminated the ability to check and balance the president, right? So you have to have that. I wish we had an emoluments article. I think that Trump's violations of the emoluments clauses are very well established and should be there. I'd also like to see an obstruction of justice, but it's the holiday season, and I don't want to be, like that greedy kid who said he didn't get enough presents. So, some fundamental level, I'll accept we've got 2 articles, and I think it's important that we move forward on them. I do have some concerns about the speed of this. My only concern is that I do want there to be an adequate and full debate. I don't want questions left open, I's left undotted, T's left uncrossed. And so I do hope that in the next week we have a genuine, thorough congressional debate on this, that it not be just bad theatrics. And ultimately, I do think, we are doing something. I don't think it's terrible to move fast. I just think it has to be done well. I will say that I had an interview the other day with a constitutional scholar who sits on the Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin, who's, to my mind, a brilliant legal thinker. And he was very interesting on this. He said there is a value to moving quickly, that we need to move at the speed of democracy. And his point there was that we are coming into a presidential year, and you have a president who has given a lot of indications that he is willing to mess with the election process, or at least try to influence it in abusive ways. And so there's an element of urgency.
Well, John, maybe you can help me with that, because let me tell you where I am on this. I am fully on board with impeachment for the reasons you've spoken. I also think that there is a lot of political reasons to do it as well. I mean, I think you need that baseline of obviously the civic obligation and the accountability. I think there's a lot of benefit politically to this, particularly in the Senate. We're going to see it. And frankly, anything that takes a day up of time in the Senate from rubber stamping unqualified right-wing judges to a life. Honestly, spoken to Ian Millhiser for this program about that. Anything that slows that roll is helpful in my estimation as well. And I'm not so concerned about the speed of this. I mean, it's certainly, as long as it's thorough. My concern is that they are they're rushing it from the perspective of they're not milking it for what it should be milked. And I don't just mean that in a very crass political way, but I mean in terms of educating the public. But here's what I understand about that, and that we can talk about that in a moment. But Jamie Raskin, in your interview with him, brings up something that is I really genuinely don't understand. How is it that impeaching him, Donald Trump, now, right, because they're going to vote on this next week, he will be impeached, then it will go to the Senate for conviction. How is impeaching him in December of 2019 any more or less a mechanism to prevent him from engaging in the same kind of acts in November of 2020? How is it any more or less from December 19 to, let's say, I don't know, June of 2020?
That's a darn good question, my friend. Here's the hope, and not the certainty. The hope is that impeaching on these issues, especially if we do not merely have a House vote, but some sort of Senate trial, it essentially puts, for the better part of several weeks, maybe a month, a real focus on these questions of election interference, election meddling, all the issues that are in play here. If the Democrats do a good job of highlighting that, I think it does raise the issue in a way that is very valid and useful. Now, you may say it's already been raised. People are well aware of it. I cannot begin to emphasize to you how many people still don't fully understand this as an election corruption issue. And so if the Democrats do a good job there, they have some potential to deliver that message. I would also say one other thing as a historian of impeachment, for what it's worth. I agree with you. In my opinion, if I was running this thing, and obviously I don't, I would have the articles developed this week and next week. I'd let them simmer over the holidays, right? Just get through, the congressional break, but the House come back in January when it's frankly people are focused, and then have the debate then. That would be my choice. I obviously am not running that. One of the reasons for that is frankly to keep this thing open, to give it time. But I will say one other thing. I have heard the debate, I think the legitimate debate about whether the House should send these over to the Senate, right? Or whether they should keep open impeachment and just vote for some articles and say, we are continuing our inquiry. And you say, well, that seems a little gimmicky. And I happen to think it does. I have troubles with that. But that approach does, at least in some extent, address your question, which is if you maintain an open, ongoing impeachment inquiry, knowing that the Senate is unlikely to act, you create an ability to respond if you have that next evidence of presidential meddling and wrongdoing.
You had broached the subject of the potential option that Democrats have, which is to vote on articles of impeachment and just keep them in the House and wait and potentially send them to the Senate later, because I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there's 4 different committees that have been engaged in investigations that have the potential to find material that rises to the level of impeachment. One is, I think it's government oversight. I think we got Ways and Means. We have the Intelligence Committee. And these are committees that are looking at things ranging from emoluments to there's apparently an IRS whistleblower that we haven't heard much on because Richie Neal is sitting on this for some reason in Western Massachusetts, head of the Ways and Means Committee. And so there's an opportunity here to hold Donald Trump to account, to leverage his future behavior. We've seen an example as soon as he got exonerated, as soon as the controversy was over with the Mueller investigation, literally the next day, he was engaging in activities that are worthy of impeachment. There's no reason to believe that this guy is going to do anything less. He wants to get reelected. He doesn't care. And there needs to be a way of holding him. The other thing that occurs to me is that you're talking about holding, and maybe you know the answer to this. Are Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and for that matter, Amy Klobuchar and Cory Booker, do they have to be in the Senate every day during impeachment? It seems to me that they might. And this is when they need to be in Iowa. Yeah. I mean, so I'm sorry, I dumped a lot of stuff on your plate again simultaneously, but give me your sense of both those things.
Well, let's start at the end and then we'll work our way back because everything you put out there was very important. This is we are intersecting with a presidential campaign. You and I are talking about the idea of perhaps slowing this process down a little bit so that you maintain leverage to keep Trump from doing wrong as regards this campaign. There is also another intersection, as you point out, and that is that there is the real prospect that you could have a Senate trial, kind of overlapping with paralleling the final stages of the Iowa caucus race. There is a real issue there because two of the front-running candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, would, in fact, be, I think, by any reasonable measure, required to be present in the Senate. I mean, you don't sit as a juror in the trial of a president of the United States on the question of his removal, which is, by the way, a reversal of the last presidential election, or at least an undoing of it. This is huge stuff. It's very important, and it's stuff that as a senator, I think you have to be there. So that has an impact on the Democratic race that is profound because Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, several other candidates would not have to be in the Senate and could presumably be spending a lot of time in Iowa and in New Hampshire. So that's something to be considered. I think we can't deny political realities. But then also to get back to this kind of broader question of how you do impeachment right. And this is the one thing, again, when I interviewed Jamie Raskin, when I've interviewed other members of the committee, there's a phrase that they keep coming back to, and that is, if we do this right. And it's not something to be underestimated. Impeachment is uncharted waters. There are many ways to do it. You can do it fast, you can do it slow. You can do it with multiple articles, you can do it with as few as one. Getting it right matters. And even if Trump is not removed from office by the Senate, the record that is put down becomes a real part of our defining of presidential accountability. And so I am in the camp that says that I don't mind if Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler and other figures say, yeah, we were rolling on this way. We've, thought about it. We've listened to people. We've heard. We're going to do something slightly different. We're going to move it this way. And one of the reasons I might argue for that is that there are as many as 6 committees in the House that have material here. Remember, there are banking issues that arise. There are foreign policy issues that arise. And so I'm in the camp that says I don't think all the files have been reviewed as much as I would review them. And again, I go to that core concept, which I just have simply no question. We talk about corruption of elections. That's a big deal. But people also do understand the idea of simple corruption where you use your office to enrich yourself and your family. And I think there's tremendous evidence of that I do believe is still worthy of examination.
John, let me ask you this. Maybe I've just gotten cynical in my increasingly old age. When Nancy Pelosi comes out and says Medicare for all is a dream, the Green New Deal is a pain, all of this stuff, and in fact also, pushes the new NAFTA this week in what I think is an attempt to sort of quash the impeachment talk, and I would say simultaneously is a big gift to corporations. I for one don't buy the whole story about frontline Democrats. I think corporate Democrats are simply using them as an excuse to pass this deal that is largely irrelevant, I think, in a myriad of ways, except for corporations getting a payoff here. is Nancy Pelosi, like, she must be aware of the fact that she's going to be pinning the two leftmost presidential candidates in Washington if she brings this up in January, as opposed to, say, like, I don't know, March, April, May, June, for that matter. How much do you think she's sensitive to that?
I've heard all the speculation, all the talk. I don't read her mind. What I can tell you is Nancy Pelosi didn't want to do impeachment. This was something she resisted to the last end. So I'd be careful about assuming that she's got some grand plan or some grand strategy even now. I think she was dragged to this by necessity, by reality. And I think it is it appears to me to be something that's being cobbled together day by day, week by week. And the questions that you raise, the questions that other people raise, these are points that we ought to pause and consider. Not because we think somebody's trying to harm somebody else. That's not my point. My point is, does racing this thing forward at the speed that they're going, does that actually give us the impeachment done right? Or does it just get impeachment done so that those who never wanted to do impeachment can move on to the next, whatever the next issue is? That's my biggest concern. And I cannot begin to emphasize, as somebody, again, who's researched all the impeachments going back to 1804, every one of those impeachments goes into a record. They're studied in constitutional law classes. They begin to form some premises on what a president can and cannot do, what a judge can and cannot do. And I do think the Congress has a fundamental responsibility that is, I would say, right up there with, the presidential election, all those political considerations. They have a fundamental responsibility to get impeachment right in the House, no matter what the Senate does. And so I, again, go to this view that if tomorrow morning somebody said, you know what, we feel we need another couple weeks on this, I would frankly be celebrating. I would be very happy. I think that would be to the good.
John Nichols, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time today.